sliding out of bed, cold at the floor. And there it was, going round and round on the bedroom rug. I ran down, could barely speak. Mum and Dad were sitting there.
What is
the teapot covered in that knitted cosy and the smell of hot milky tea and rashers.
Guess what Santa brought?
You'll never guess what Santa brought, I said.
Well, doesn't that beat
Well,
Banner?
doesn't that beat Banner, said my
Train
mum.
set, no
A
less.
train set, no
Isn't
less.
Santa the smart?
Isn't Santa the smart fella?
Turn the moment gold with Barry's Gold Blend Tea.
So last night, when I came home with the train set, Mary couldn't believe it.
Martin, that's not what they wanted.
She, that's not what they wanted at all, she said. Santa will bring them what they want, I said. This is from me. Put the kettle on, we'll have a cup of tea.
Now you have 3 great reasons to switch your family to VHI Healthcare. We're leading the way in family healthcare with exclusive access to our VHI Swift Care clinics, faster access to our VHI Pediatric Clinic, and now you can get 25% off all kids under 18 on all our One plans until February 28th. Switch today. Call 1890 444444 or search VHI Kids. VHI Healthcare. When you need us, we're there. Terms and conditions apply. VHI Healthcare DAC trading as VHI Healthcare is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland and is tied to VHI Insurance DAC for health insurance in Ireland.
Open up your door.
Whether they're around the corner or around the world, this Christmas, make sure your loved ones know you're thinking of them. Send love with a Christmas parcel with Unpost. And don't forget the last date for posting parcels to Europe is Wednesday, December 12th. Get your Christmas stamp booklet at your local post office, selected retailers, or at onpost.com. Unpost. This Christmas, your world's wide open.
Open up the door.
In music, you'll find 12 notes. They can start down here and go right up here. A perfect range indeed. But there is another. Because during the Audi Experience 191 sales event, you'll find the Audi range starting from just 2.9% APR at your local authorised Audi dealer now. Sounds good, right? Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement and subject to lending criteria. Deposit required. T's and C's apply. Volkswagen Bank GmbH Branch Ireland is authorised by the Federal Financial Supervisory Authority in Germany and regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland for conduct of business rules. Visit audi.ie.
Has your cordless vacuum run out of power again? Bosch has the solution for you. The all-new Bosch Unlimited Cordless Vacuum with up to 60 minutes runtime. For more information and a full demonstration, call to Power City today.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie. Championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products.
Now, you're very welcome back. So we're reviewing the Sunday Papers. The latest, by the way, on Munster is that they're 6 points to 0 up against Cast after 30 minutes. We have with us Cliona Foley, presenter of Off the Bench and journalist, and suffering with a cough. So if you
warning
break out in a cough, we'll try and dig in and help you out. And then we have Declan Lynch with us as well, of course, from the Sunday Independent, author of several books, including the Air Sports Book of the Year nominated Tony 10. Cliona Foley is a judge on the panel. We've kept you apart all morning. I want to assure everybody the integrity of the competition remains.
Okay. We should be in different studios. Actually,
that's right, yeah. No eye contact. Yeah. So I'll run through the headlines, and Raheem Sterling dominates a lot of the back pages, as you might imagine, if you saw this incident that we were just talking about before the break, where he was abused by several Chelsea fans as he was going to pick up a ball behind the end line, and certainly the suspicion or the accusation is that the language used was racist, and various lip readers, professional and amateur, have been given their opinions. So the back page of the Star on Sunday, Ra, as in Raheem, Ra race hate, Chelsea open investigation into claims Stir abused. Henry Pratt here. Chelsea have launched an inquiry into allegations that Raheem Sterling was racially abused at Stamford Bridge. Footage of the flashpoint, which occurred in the first half, was posted on social media. Chelsea spokesperson, we're aware of the video footage and the reports. Will investigate the matter thoroughly and take the strongest possible action where necessary. Then The Sun, Chelsea 2, Man City 0, the headline as well, I'm sure you've seen that. So sick is their headline. And there's a picture, as I'm sure you can see here if you're streaming on Facebook. If you're listening on the radio, it's Sterling picking up the ball and looking at the blurred faces in this picture of the crowd as they point and scream, and there is always something just so absorbing about these pictures where you see 20 usually middle-aged men screaming at someone in their 20s at close proximity. So he's just looking at them. It's a strong picture. Police probe claims of vile racism aimed at Raheem is Dan King's story. It's in the Mirror as well on their back page. Chelsea race storm. Police and club launch investigation into vile Sterling abuse, and they have a picture. He's blurred out again, but of, in particular, the man on the right who is the one accused of making the racist slur. Different tone on the back page of the Sunday World. They have Mo Ho Ho, which is Mo Salah, jingle bells for Salah as he hits hat-trick for Poole. And then the Sunday Independent, a different tact. Again, they're focused on Leinster, who ride their luck. That was yesterday, a picture of Jordan Larmour after his try. They have Chelsea win ignites title race below that with Miguel Delaney. And up top, actually, we'll touch on this briefly in a moment, Dermot Crowe was watching players, GAA players that is, get to grips with new rules without too much fuss. This was Meath against Laois, who played yesterday with the new rules, the 3 hand passes and the offensive mark. Sunday Times, picture of Mo Salah at the very top, but then the big picture is of David Luiz sliding and celebrating his goal. Man City lose 2-0 at Chelsea in the first league defeat of the season. And then beneath that, Peter Wilson, fans racist rant at Sterling sparks police investigation. And Peter Wilson writes, the middle-aged supporter seen on BT Sports live coverage of the Premier League game appeared to call Sterling a black blank as he collected the ball just in front of where the man in glasses and blue jacket was standing with others who were also screaming abuse. And then there was a story on the side. Oh yeah, so on the right-hand side then, a flag ban can't stop March of Leinster in Europe. So it seems that at the Rec yesterday, there were 1,300 Leinster flags confiscated on the basis that they were snappable and therefore dangerous. And then weapons, yeah. On the back page of the Mail, jaw dropping, as in Jordan Larmour. A stunning interception try by Pacey Larmour gets the European champions back on track in Bath, and then City are stunned at the bottom. So there are your back pages. The Raheem Sterling story certainly catches the eye, and there's an investigation ongoing. Had you seen the clip? Have you seen the clip of the man shouting? Yeah. I must confess, so I first saw this with Rio Ferdinand, who tweeted about it, and last night the video had 1 million views. Yeah. And he said, this is, racism, it has to be stamped out. What are we going to do about this? And it's we're all amateur lip readers, I suppose. And I guess because it's planted in my head, looked out for the racist slur and had seen a different one.
Really?
Yes. I had been able, after 20 views, to see effing.
I looked at it and couldn't quite be sure what I was seeing, and I think it's really interesting. Like on some of those newspapers, the fans in question, their pictures are pixelated, and in the Sunday Times they're not pixelated, which is very interesting. I just think there's a whole interesting legal thing going on here. The one that caught my eye was last week, because there was a banana skin thrown at Aubameyang last week in a match, and actually that didn't, I think, get half as much coverage as this one does, which to me shows the power of video now in terms of media. If it's caught on video now and it gets out last night, and Ian Wright tweeted it, and it started doing the rounds very quickly. Yeah,
it becomes big very quickly. I mean, it remains to be seen exactly what he said. I mean, I was just struck today when I had thought that it was a completely different slur being talked about, and then I read today, actually everybody else has seen something else. There is the danger with lip reading. I suspect if the person in question has not said something racist, then he will have a real case and will go to work on Monday morning and have... it's going to be a tricky situation for him. That said, one, if he did say something, it's obviously very serious and has to be investigated. And two, it's not like he was wishing Raheem Sterling well either. It wasn't an edifying moment either way.
He wasn't either. He's not a kind of archetypal skinhead from the 1970s fuming with incoherent hate because he's basically looks like a terribly violent person. He looks like a middle manager, a kind of a quantity survey. All the sort of parties in this sort of incident just look like characters from The Office. Yeah. That's a kind of a weird aspect of it, because we have a very cliched idea in our heads of who's racist or who's liable to come out with such statements. And Sterling's statement about the the press.
Can I read that out because people may not have seen it? So
I think that's really interesting.
it really is, and it ties in with the paper review. So Raheem Sterling has taken to Instagram and he says, "Good morning. I just want to say I'm not normally the person to talk a lot, but when I think I need my point to be heard, I will speak up. Regarding what was said at the Chelsea game, as you can see by my reaction," and you've seen here a picture where he's half smiling or looking away in befuddlement, "I just had to laugh because I don't expect no better. For example, you have two young players starting out in their careers, both play for the same team. Both have done the right thing, which is to buy a new house for their mothers, who have put in a lot of time and love into helping them get where they are. But look how the newspapers get their message across for the young black player and then for the young white player. I think that this is unacceptable. Both innocent, have not done a thing wrong, and just by the way it has been worded, the young black kid is looked at in a bad light, which helps fuel racism and aggressive behaviour. So for all the newspapers that don't understand why people are racist in this day and age, all I have to say is have a second thought about fair publicity and give all players an equal chance." So the story he's talking about, Phil Foden, the Manchester City wonder kid, bought a house for his parents and was talked about setting up their future. Whereas the headline for another Manchester City player who happened to be black is young Manchester City footballer 20 who's on 25 grand a week splashes out on mansion on market for 2.25 million despite never having started a Premier League game. And when they're side by side, it would be very fair to say that Raheem Sterling has raised a very fair point.
Yeah, and it's not just about football, this. I mean, this isn't happening in a vacuum in England in general. Like Brexit is a synonym for me. It's just racism. The reason that Brexit is unworkable was that it was never a plan. It's a kind of a fever, and the fever and what's driving that fever is essentially racism at a very kind of multi-layered level. It's just we don't really want foreigners having much to do with our world, and that's why it's people say, "Oh, how are we going to implement this thing?" You can't implement hate. Do you know what I mean? It isn't a sort of a political strategy, and that's why it's utterly unworkable. People think, "Oh, no, this problem with Northern Ireland." The only thing with Northern Ireland is it was the first example of it encountering reality, and reality doesn't fit with this stuff. Do you know what I mean? This is when you see Raheem there being abused by these guys. It's madness. There's nothing real about that. It's crazy. It's just ridiculous, right? That's why he's laughing. Of course, it's absurd. Yet that has become the normal discourse of England at this time of Brexit. So they're not just like dissing Raheem Sterling when they're doing this. It's a whole culture has been diseased by this thing, with the connivance and with the approval of the highest ranking politicians of the land. This is why England is now in this appalling state.
And I presume you agree that the media has played a real part in that?
Hugely, of course it has. It's been disgraced itself daily, not just in the propagandist sense, the openly propagandist newspapers which are owned by, billionaires who are always up to no good. You can see it in the BBC has disgraced itself again and again. I'm watching Newsnight on several occasions, and they're talking to some twat like Ian Duncan Smith, and he's clearly, they get to the point where his argument has totally fallen to the ground. And instead of saying, Ian Duncan Smith, anyone with any sense could have said that everything that you have proposed about Brexit is nonsense. And here you are now. And instead of that, they ask him something like, what does this mean for Theresa May? You see them constantly avoiding it, constantly avoiding the reality and the hard question, because in a way, the people who the official media is afraid of confronting the bought and paid for media. So you've got this malaise.
Why do you think that would be the case? Why would they be afraid of confronting?
They're constantly. There's this knee-jerk thing that they're constantly afraid of going against the people, going against the will of the people. We don't want to be seen as trendy Londoners, who know better than the people of England. Elites. We don't want to be seen as elites, right? Whereas like the people driving Brexit are almost all public school boys or extremely rich people. There is this sense that people who have read books are the elite, and the BBC is full of those people. So a lot of people in the BBC are Remainers, I'm sure. I would say about 90% of them, but officially the way they put out their political programmes, they maintain this kind of stuff. So they're assisting it as well. And, you know, of course this kind of thing is going to happen with Raheem Sterling, but it's important, and it's really good that he's put it in that context of newspapers. But I think it's for us as well to see it in an even broader context.
Yeah, no, fair point. Just on the newspaper front, if you were unaware of this thing going on, and it's been talked about more increasingly in the last 6 months with regard to Sterling, there's an Adam Keyworth on Twitter, @AdamKeyworth, who has compiled a chronicle of various headlines relating to Raheem Sterling over the last number of years. I've counted over 30 of them here. He's just done a thread of story after story. And I mean, some of them are quite something. From trouble youth to 100k a week, the life of footy idiot Raheem Sterling in The Sun. I'm not sure why he's a footy idiot, but there you go. Don't be so greedy. This was when he wanted an improved offer and Brendan Rodgers was warning him that he mightn't get it. Now, I don't think "don't be so greedy" was necessarily Rodgers' phrase. The one where, this is Adam Keyworth, the one where Raheem was obscene, having bought his mum a nice sink out of his own money. England failure steps off plane and insults fans by showing off blinging house. I mean, it's all there. It's all dog whistling.
And you know, Joe, sometimes I think...
Obscene Raheem is the headline. But don't worry, and they have a pound sign, Sterling is on the up.
I think probably
it's really terrible.
Not in a racist sense at all, but I think I'm probably guilty of this sometimes when I see... I remember being on Twitter making a joke about, you know, there was a story about Fellaini having his own, you know, barber shop in his house. He was selling his house and going, you know, what's the story here? These guys have more money than sense. So I think that sometimes I fall into that trap as well. Yeah. Not on race, but on these guys live such a privileged life. But the one thing I think is interesting about it, and I think it's on that montage as well that you're looking at, is an awful lot of it is done in the news sections of tabloids especially, not in the sports sections, but that's leading, and that's the front page of a lot of these. Correct, and I remember being in here at one time with you. I remember we actually were reading a really good feature on Sterling and saying he actually comes across as a really sound guy. Yeah. And that's not the image that you see of him, but it is very much... the news pages, the news-led, you know, agenda and these things.
Because I would say, in fairness to those stories, like the Fellaini has a barber in his house.
I just laughed out loud because I just thought it was so funny.
I think they're okay, and we're all curious about what they spend their money on because it's just such a detached world from day-to-day living. However, it's almost the volume of Sterling stories.
Yes, and as he's shown with that two boys from Man City. It's written differently if it's a white boy. That's interesting that's his perception and that he's showing that because there's serious questions to be asked.
It seems
editorially.
He can do no right because in the Mail they have Manchester City star Raheem Sterling earns $200,000 a week but takes £80 EasyJet flight back from holiday. Both cheap and lavish.
He's got it everywhere. He gets it in the neck everywhere. He's
called Love Rat in various places. Raheem Sterling treats himself to a spot of breakfast after missing out on being crowned Young Player of the Year. The night before. It
was like the time Ashley Cole, the great Ashley, after
some... the car.
Well, no, he just came... He was seen smiling. It was during some England escapade. I mean, they were doing very badly in some tournament. Now, that could be a choice of many occasions. But I think he was coming off a plane and he was smiling and apparently enjoying a joke of some kind. And, you know, to
see that racism still exist in British football, it's just... You know, it just must be soul destroying for those players. You know, we thought the violence. You know, they talk about, you know, taking the violence, the terrorist violence out of British football, making it a more family place. Yeah. To me, the one was more shocking last week was the guy throwing the banana. Banana skin. I just thought that's the 70s. Like, now, reportedly arrested, presumably gets a life ban from Spurs, but like. The good thing is video now captures this stuff and they're nailed. The bad thing is that it still exists. It just...
But the real danger, though, is that this is just going to be seen as a football story, you know? What's football going to do to stop this, right? You know, talk to the Tory party about this. This is not about football.
It's a symptom.
Yeah, and that is the... You'll see all the football now will be sort of saying, what are we going to do about this?
Bring back ID cards.
Yeah, this stuff. So that's fundamentally wrong. That this is not about football, really.
Eamon Sweeney brings up this whole area, funny enough, and doesn't mention the Sterling incident, so I would presume it was written even before the Sterling incident. And he opens by saying, the 1970s were desperate, weren't they? Bananas being thrown at footballers, comedians making sexist remarks at award ceremonies, and football managers aiming jibes at gay people. Thank God we've got away from all that stuff. Hang on, my mistake.
Yeah.
His overarching point is about he is not a fan of people who talk about political correctness has gone mad. He says these days we're apparently living under the jackbooted tyranny of the social justice warrior, and yet goes on to talk about the many problems that still exist.
I think it probably came on foot, Joe, of the Hegerberg of the Ballon d'Or incident.
And the Aubameyang and the
and it
Ballon
actually
d'Or
sums up a lot of what we're talking about here, isn't it? That piece, yeah.
Now I think people do react to the Ballon d'Or situation. I mean, I don't know what your man was thinking. It was definitely not his best move by some distance. Yeah, I do think people almost react to the scale of the vitriol then aimed at that person. Like he becomes at the centre of a global hatred for about 48 hours. Even though he comes out and apologises, there comes a point where you have to say, okay, well, we're not going to ruin your life necessarily. But that happens as well. Like people are blamed beyond all belief for everything.
Yeah, there's a context for that thing as well, right? Which is that this was a big, corporate football event. All corporate football events are really terrible, right? It's by its law decrees it, right? If you were to tell a good joke at one of these things, they would walk out on you, like, you know what I mean? But all jokes have to be bad. All the music has to be bad. It has to be unbelievably boring, right? It used to amaze me, actually. I would see, some of the top English football writers would go off to Geneva to cover the draw for the semi-final of the Champions League or something like this. So I said, what are you going there for? I'd imagine you to go there, you have to get up in the morning, you have to sort of, get a taxi out to the airport, you have to fly to all the things you have to do to be there, right? And, to see like a couple of balls being drawn out of why would you do that? I mean, if I were running the sports department, the first thing I would do is stop people going to draws of tournaments, right? Since we now have television.
Yes.
There was a thing, television was invented, and as a result, a lot of the reason for this ceased to exist. So that we have a context for poor old Solveig as well, that he's working in a very, very bad room there, you know? Whatever.
Yeah, but that's spoken from a position of not having to fill a daily schedule of sports. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. People go to those things to get interviews with famous players. They do all that stuff.
But they wouldn't need to do that either, because everyone says the same thing always, which is that they lie. They say we're happy with the draw. We think we'll do quite well. I've never heard anyone saying we are really screwed this time.
Every game is tough.
We're in the group of death. The Eamon Sweeney's last few paragraphs on that, it's well worth reading the piece, because he says that things are getting better. He's talking about people saying, oh, it's political correctness. He's saying that things are getting better is what really worries the bigots. When they say you can't say what you want anymore, what they really mean is they can't get on with their old nonsense anymore without being challenged. They have to be challenged, because if they're not, we're going along with the idea that sport, and soccer in particular, doesn't have to move on with the rest of society. Why would we ever want to do that?
Yeah.
Because Declan's point, very interesting point is about England, is where is English society on this?
Yeah. To jump then, to stay with football for a few moments, there were two pieces that caught our eyes, I think. David Sneyd on page 83 of the Mail on Sunday with Kevin Foley has a fantastic introduction, Cliona, and then we'll get on to Yerry Mina of Everton, who you may be unfamiliar with, or certainly unfamiliar with his backstory. It's quite extraordinary in the Sunday Times and elsewhere. So David Sneyd interviewing Kevin Foley on the Mail on Sunday. Kevin Foley, who, unfortunately for him, we're all very familiar with Kevin Foley more so than anything for being dropped on the eve of Euro 2012 when he thought he was in the squad, and there were photos of him sitting alone on a bench, and it was terrible. I mean, it was real last minute unexpected dropping. But David Sneyd's gone over to Wolves, where he's now coaching, to speak to him.
Yeah, and I just think people will be really interested in this, given what Damien Duff said a few weeks ago about how much work, is now acceptable to be doing with the under-15s or the under-13s, whatever it was. The intro is just brilliantly written. Should we ruin it on people? Will it be a spoiler if you ruin it?
Yes,
people?
ruin it at this stage.
Well, anyway, so he says every Tuesday morning is the same in Wolves. Players gather, they're in the training ground at 8:30. They get, get the GPSs on, they get all this stuff done, they get their schedules to do all that, they do S&C, they do everything, and then before their work is done at 5:30, there'll be some study. This, after all, is a typical Tuesday for Wolverhampton Wanderers under-13s. Because I was reading the intro going, why is he telling us all this stuff? We know footballers do this. And then I realised what it was he was talking about. And Kevin Foley is involved at the underage section.
It seems they're on their relief day from school, the Wolves under-13s, which suggests they get one day off a week from school to be full-time footballers and then do a few lessons in the evening.
It was like that John Kenny thing, the famous rousing speech, the blood-curdling speech before the match, which has the punchline, and next year when you're playing under 10, so it's from that great sort of genre.
Yeah, it's amazing really the way they're being coached at that age already, under 13s. It seems Wolves have a grade 1 academy, so you have to spend a certain amount of years.
And they're quite unusual. They're one of the few clubs that has an academy at that level, which is really interesting. They're only one of 24 clubs in England and Wales with Category 1 status for their academy. The guidelines recommend 2.5 million is to be set aside to operate a top grade academy, and a minimum of 18 full-time staff are required. Just talking about it's an interesting piece, isn't it, on the level of detail and work that's gone into these kids, and his experience with it as well.
But then again, you see, you go to Yerry Mina then, and you're at the Academy of Life.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, Yerry Mina, who we've probably all watched for Everton and vaguely aware he's South American, and maybe saw him for Colombia against England during the World Cup. And look, it's the cliched South American route into the football
that's the
world.
only place you can get this, or Africa. You know what I mean? Like the stories of playing barefoot when you have no boots, having to hang off the back of cement lorries because you have no bus fare, pedaling all day on a bicycle, delivering fruit for $2 a day. This is, I suppose, what Irish people used to do as well. I think Brian Kerr was talking about this the other week, wasn't he? That as a footballer, you developed agility from things like, jumping on the back of lorries and all this. That, in fact, your daily life prepared you for football in a way that it just doesn't now.
Well, I know Nicky Budd is a big fan of kids climbing trees. It teaches them how to fall.
Oh, well,
he's in the Man United Academy. But it seems he had a dreadful upbringing, really. Lived with his parents and brother in a single rented room, and his dad would walk the streets looking for work every day.
And Colombia, possibly in a lot of South American countries, typical of, they lived in a one room place. That was it with his family. It's a good piece because it is, as Declan says, it does contrast with where they're coming from and the hunger maybe that children are coming from in sport from Africa and from South America, because they have so little that they're willing to work so hard,
He talked about when he was 14 and he said, listen, Mum, I'm going to build a house for you one day. I'm going to make sure you'll be fed from the hand of God. My mum started to cry again. She said, don't worry, Mina. I'm also doing my best to try to keep you. He said, from that day, wherever I travel in the world to play my football, my motivation before I go out in the field, I always say, this is my mum's dinner. Like in a few weeks' time, Gabriel Jesus' mum's dinner. Either the striker's mum's dinner or mine. Now that's a hell of an attitude to bring onto a pitch, fighting for your mum's dinner. So that's what he's doing. And the reason they've spoken to him is they're playing tomorrow against Watford. So when you watch Yerry Mina, all 6'5" of him, playing in defence, that's where he's coming from on the pitch. It's a hell of an attitude. So that's in a few places. He's spoken to the Sunday Times.
Sunday Times and the Mail anyway.
But there is, that's just again the point about Damien Duff saying that they just don't play enough. Kids they literally do not play enough football in their lives. Which it is very interesting. I remember like the Liverpool Academy for years. I remember there was this amazing period when the only player who came out of it was Jay Spearing. For years. He was like Jason. This is Michael Owen and Stephen Gerrard were the last really good players to come out of it. And then there was this period. And this was supposed to be a highly sort of prestigious academy with top methods and all this. And somehow they were missing out on all the really good players. And the ones that they had, they trained them for something or other. But so it's extraordinary how a system like that can not function as it's supposed to. Even though they're doing supposedly all the right things. When you have these fellas down in in Colombia.
No, there is a kind of mysterious alchemy to the whole thing at the end of the day, even for all the sports science.
Sure.
Like how many of that Wolves under-13s bunch will make it? None.
And
statistically none.
Statistically none. And he says in that piece that, you know, they're using sports science to be careful not to overtrain them. And yet, on the other hand, he's saying, I know what Damien's saying about the Shamrock Rovers under-15s or whatever, you know. So there is that whole, this constant struggle, I suppose, now, you know, trying to balance it.
We haven't scratched on half the stuff we're going to get to. We'll take a short break. There's John Kavanagh, who sat down and done a big 2-page spread with Paul Kimmage. There's Rachel Blackmore, who potentially is going to add another slice of history to her career today. The Brian O'Driscoll painkillers comments are picked up on in various places. Frank Murphy, he of Cork, is stepping down. There's other GAA pieces that we'll touch on too, and a few more bits and pieces besides. So we've lots to get through on the far side in just a second.
Join that conversation. Text us on 53106. Texts cost 30 cents.
Today at Power City, we're open till 9 p.m. Choose from our huge range of laptops, tablets and smart TVs. That's Power City, open tonight till 9.
Here's an offer from Fiat, done in a way that gets the pesky lawyers off our backs. The Fiat Tipo and the Fiat 191 range now come with 3 years free servicing with a really low 3 blank. Blank's the thing that'd mean you'd have to listen to all those legal T's and C's the lawyers love. But we didn't say it. So bye-bye lawyers. Hello Fiat 191 range cracking offer. Test drive the Fiat 191 range at your local dealer. T's and C's apply, obviously. Visit fiat.ie.
I saw Santa on Christmas Day and he has a big beard. A big white one. Yeah. And he's wearing red stuff. And he had a Christmas hat on as well. He came down the chimney. He left a big bag of presents, like a huge one. He doesn't go on holiday. No.
Never seen Santa? Should have gone to Specsavers.
How does he fit down the chimney?
Hello, I'm Liz O'Donnell, Chairperson of the Road Safety Authority. So far this year, 37 pedestrians have tragically lost their lives on our roads. That's already 10 more than in the whole of 2017. As a pedestrian, you're amongst the most vulnerable of all road users. So before you take a step, take steps to protect yourself. Be visible. Allow enough time to cross the road, especially now with the darker mornings and evenings. Always face oncoming traffic and stop to let it pass safely. And drivers, slow down. There could be a pedestrian in the shadows or around that bend. Always think pedestrians. A message from the Road Safety Authority.
Looking to light up your tree? Deck it with B&Q. We've got 25% off Christmas tree lights to help you do it for less. That's 25% off Christmas tree lights. So get Christmas ready with B&Q. You can do it when you B&Q it. Outdoor lights and silhouettes not included.
I'm Alex Dunn from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. I have just returned from Yemen, where conflict has torn the country apart. It's also decimated the health system, leaving many in urgent need of care. MSF is treating the wounded and fighting disease on both sides of the front line. But we need your help. Please make an urgent donation today. Free phone 1-800-905-509. That's 1-800-905-509. Or visit msf.ie. Thank you.
Leia Healthcare are for the tumbles, jumps and bumps in life. That's why we're recording this ad was
Thanks to saving over €340 on my health insurance. I'm saving over €340 on mine.
Where Mom pays for mine. With Flex 125 Explorer from Leia Healthcare. Because when you pay for one of your kids' or teens' health insurance, the rest goes free. Oh, it's good to live. Leia Healthcare. Looking after you always.
Insurance provided by Ellipse Insurance Limited, trading as Leia Healthcare. Leia Healthcare Limited, trading as Leia Healthcare and Leia Life, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. A kid or teen is defined as a dependent aged under 18. Savings based on one free kid or teen. Offer available from December 15th, 2018.
Hey, Niamh, remember that film with that guy in it? Oh, what's the actor? Oh, you know, he's got that little face. And he looks like a cross between a Yorkshire Terrier and a wise baby.
Wise baby?
He has the high-pitched voice. Like an anxious wasp.
Oh, people are terrible at remembering stuff. Luckily, you don't need any memory with the eFlow M50 Quick Pay app. It reminds you to pay your toll before the 8 p.m. deadline. You've enough to be forgetting.
He's got giant hair on his head, you know the guy.
Download the app or visit eflow.ie for more ways to pay.
At Kenwood, we have a range of mixers to suit every cooking style. So whether you're an experienced chef or just starting out, you'll find your ideal kitchen companion in store or online at powercity.ie.
This Christmas at the perfume shop, we have the perfect gifts for that someone special. Like Boss Bottled Night, half price at only €63 for a 200ml while stocks last. Our expert staff will be able to gift wrap your purchase for free and join our rewards club to earn points on every purchase. Only at the perfume shop. Offer ends 13th of December.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie. Championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products.
Now, you're very welcome back. So before we continue the Sunday Papers, we'll check in at Thomond Park with James Downey, who's watching Munster 6, Cast 0. Second half just starting. James, how are things going then? What do we make of that first half?
It wasn't the greatest first half, to be honest. It's one for a purist, really. I think Munster left a lot of points out there. I think they tried to kill the game off very early. They had opportunities to go for goal, to stretch their lead out, and they kicked for the corner and they lost the line out, and it's been pretty error-strewn, to be honest, from both sides. Castor have yet to get into Munster's 22 and have the ball in Munster's 22. So look, it's all signs are going with Munster at the moment, but they've had that Gilchrist opportunity of straight off the training park, off the line out. Andy Conway went through, and I thought he had the opportunity to put Mike Haley through, actually, and then Tyg Byrne knocked it on then a couple of phases later. So look, it's a frustrating game at the moment, but Munster now have got a scrum in the 5 metres out from Castor line, so hopefully they can keep the pressure on. But you get the sense the crowd, they need a score. They're nearly trying to force a try just to get the crowd behind them and kind of push Castor away, but Castor's still hanging in there. They haven't done anything, but they're still there.
James, thanks very much. Super stuff. 42 minutes gone. Munster 6, Cast 0. Second half just started. We're reviewing the papers with thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade, a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products. We have Cliona Foley and Declan Lynch here in studio. And a segue of sorts, Katie Taylor has been written about in various quarters, Mick Foley in the Sunday Times and Mark Gallagher here in the Mail, and certainly the hope and expectation is that her fight next week against Eva Wallstrom will register in a big way and be a really tough fight, not like the Cindy Serrano fight a couple of months ago where she was fairly reluctant to get involved with Katie Taylor. So Brian Peters is saying here, Eva, very accomplished fighter. She's undefeated in 23 professional bouts. A big star back in Finland. She will test Katie. She will definitely take rounds off her. This could be quite close. So we are looking forward to that on Saturday. Meanwhile, John Kavanagh, at one point in conversation with Paul Kimmage, is talking about the disdain a lot of people have for UFC and for MMA generally, and he talked about how he's always jealous when he hears Katie Taylor on the radio and they're just talking about her achievements. She's not asked to defend boxing every time. Why do you like punching girls in the head? You gave a girl a concussion the last time. Why is that allowed? She's treated with respect. You're great. We love you. You're showing women can be strong, and I would love if just once we were treated the same. That is one quote in a series of many quotes. John Kavanagh here across two big Sunday Independent pages with Paul Kimmage. So, I mean, look, there's loads in it.
There is, I mean, I think anybody who's interested in mixed martial arts, and, you know, Kavanagh always makes is careful to delineate the difference between UFC and mixed martial arts. So it's quite interesting in this because he does talk about how they're struggling to get recognition from the Sports Council in Ireland, and how with some combat sports, because there's so many versions of them and competition between them, and so he actually outlines the Sports Council's problem at the moment with these sports and why they won't, bring them in under their banner and support them. So that point of view of it is very interesting for me. Somebody who's interested in this kind of stuff. I think that's really interesting.
There's 50 different styles, he said, and Sport Ireland want them all 50.
Of so many combat sports, yeah.
Like at one point he sort of jokes that every second week, he comes across a new style with a new name. But he says they want all 50 styles, Sport Ireland, to join the IMAC, which is the Irish Martial Arts Committee.
Yeah.
Now he says the Irish Martial Arts Committee hate MMA.
So you get some insights straight away, exactly. And I mean, we know karate, which has just become an Olympic sport. I mean, the Irish, there's a big split in Irish karate at the moment, and it's caused havoc because there's two different organisations now saying that they're running it. So all of that stuff, I think, for me, I think it's really interesting. I think people would be interested in that.
Did you realise as well, he's trying to talk about the fact that he'd been tweeting Leo Varadkar about this around the time of the All Blacks game, that he was talking about amateur MMA, and he was saying that Ireland came second.
Yeah,
in the
I didn't know
medals.
that.
Yeah, there were 51 nations. Ireland came second behind the Russians, and the Russians are sponsored by the state and have 65,000 fighters, where Ireland have 100. They all paid for their own flight, their own ticket. He said, I was very proud of that.
We sent 13 fighters to it. We won 3 gold, 2 silver and 3 bronze.
Yeah.
And all the gold medals, he's pointing out, came out of his gym, the SBG gym. But that kind of stuff, you see, you don't hear that because we only hear the sensational stuff. And a lot of what we hear about MMA, I think, also is always about UFC.
Yes.
And they're two completely different animals.
Things. Yeah, no, he's keen to stress that point.
Yeah, so I think that's very interesting. That element of it is very interesting.
Declan, you were struck by the fact that, a few years ago now, Alvarez, after the Alvarez fight at Madison Square Garden, where Kavanagh says that was, in his eyes, McGregor's peak, he told him, you're done. It was at a wedding they were at.
Yeah.
All the best. Enjoy the rest of your life. Conor was shocked. I said, what else are you going to do? You're a two-weight world champion. You've got out the other end of this grind, this meat grinder, with no damage. You're in a very small percentage and you made plenty of money. Go off and enjoy yourself. McGregor was quite shocked.
Yeah, there's this strand of running through it in which Paul is kind of jousting with
We'll get on to that,
about this. And it's just about this whole issue of like, is McGregor going to end up like, he mentions Mike Tyson, think of all the, Paul Kimmage said, think of all the money Tyson earned. And Kevin said, yeah, and he's back doing appearances now and shaking people's hands. And Kimmage says, exactly. And Kevin says, that's something you'll never see Conor do. He's as competitive now with his business, his whiskey, as he is with his fighting. But I'm sure a similar exchange would have happened with many people associated with professional fighters, going back the decades. No, that's not going to happen with this guy.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting. It is the great question, like, as to why on earth they don't just stop. It goes across a lot of walks of life, though. I always wonder with like people who write like massive bestseller airport books, and one of them sells 30 million or something. And they keep writing books, why? Why would you do that? Your only function was to make money. That was it, like, and you made loads of money.
But you don't write for money.
You
don't only write for money.
No, it never actually crosses my mind when you know what, this will make me this, that, or the other. You just can't do it like that. It just doesn't work like that, sort of. It's kind of weird.
Does that not apply for the author who sells 30 million?
Oh no, they do definitely want to make money.
Right, okay.
They're just different things. They're like different jobs or something. There's a lot of writing that you couldn't conceive of doing if you were only doing it for money. It's a great accident if you do happen to make money out of it. But there's another kind of writing which has only one purpose, and that is it has no aesthetic purpose, really.
So it's the airport thriller.
Yeah, you know what I mean. There's only one function there.
Yeah.
And some people just have a facility for that. A lot of people who write very, very good books can't do that for some reason. It's just it's not a kind of a thing to be belittled necessarily. It's a particular skill that some people have. And it's not, given the skills that there are out there to do all sorts of damage, it's not one of the more sort of pernicious skills you can have. But like, they are completely different things.
Yeah, no, they are, I suppose. As a brief aside, actually, he says that McGregor doesn't actually spend much money. He says, it sounds weird, but he doesn't. Everything he wears is paid to wear.
I thought that's a brilliant line.
Everything he drives is given to him. He's not into restaurants. His missus makes his meals. He's in a fairly modest home. He doesn't gamble, so he's not worried about that. I suppose, funny, the section I've got the highlighter out the most in is the men behaving badly.
Yeah, there's 3 sections of it, and that's the third section is the last section.
Yeah.
And so he, and that's what makes Kimmage interesting always, I think, is that he asks the hard questions. And at one stage he's asking him about the stuff that happened in America. He's comparing him, Federer, he's quoting Federer recently saying, this Irish guy who, throws things about. Yeah. And he puts the question to him. Here's the point. He says, what about Conor's legacy? He said, about Federer. He says, that's his legacy now. This is Kimmage saying, he's not the great Irish fighter. He's the foul-mouthed tramp who runs around causing riots. And this is the line that he's asking all the time, which is like, what do you think his legacy is going to be? Where is he going to go with this? What's he going to do with it? So he keeps pushing that, and I think that's interesting. For me, what I always find interesting about Kavanagh is that, he seems to be such a gent, so balanced and reasonable in many ways. And he's working with a guy who we can see is volatile. We don't know. is, always says it's an act. We don't really see what's behind the act. So there's that whole interesting thing going on. But he does repeatedly put questions to him here about some of McGregor's rhetoric, which some of it I find really distasteful. And Kavanagh keeps saying, his reply repeated is, he says childish things. Now, I think they're not childish. I just think some of his rhetoric is obnoxious. I don't care what the context for it is. If you're trying to sell a fight, there's still no excuse for some of it, in my opinion, and that's a personal thing with me. So in some respects, I think that Kavanagh gets away with that, saying, "Oh, it's just childish talk." It's not. It's not childish talk, and we're talking today about how language and words are so important, and can be so volatile and cause so much problems. But it's a very interesting read, and you might look at it and go, "Oh, is there anything we don't know?" There's stuff here I didn't know, and I just thought it was interesting as well.
There is a good jousting about the language thing. So they're talking, and the childish explanation is used, and also he does compare him to Gunnar Nelson, who hasn't made any money, but wouldn't say boo to anyone. And so Kavanagh says, so if we can agree that the point of professional fighting is to make money, Connor's way of doing it is clearly the best. Paul says, and we do agree. The question is, when is too far? Kavanagh, I certainly wouldn't stand for anything racist or something along those lines. I mean, some of the stuff he says is just childish. I can't take it all seriously. What about the stuff about Habib and not crossing the line? What in particular? Kimmage, there's a smell off your father. Kavanagh, yeah, dumb, stupid, childish. Wrong? Okay, wrong. That's crossing the line, says Kimmage. I just find it silly. And then, as you say, Cliona, the point is, but what about Connor's legacy? And he mentions how Federer that's how Federer knows McGregor as foul-mounted tramp, and Kavanagh says, right. Kimmage says, that's the damage. And he says, and that's something Connor has to live with. But later on he makes a point that Connor's not apologetic for anything. He's not.
He says he's not going to back down on anything.
No,
and actually, there's a point, I think, isn't there a point in it where Kimmage says, implies, I'd like to get him in and do an interview, and Kavanagh says he won't do one.
That'll never happen.
Never happen.
He doesn't feel the need to explain himself.
Yeah, exactly. And
I was wondering, there was a homophobic slur which cropped up in the last year or so. I was wondering, would that arise with Kavanagh, given his brother's very openly gay and public figure? Didn't seem to arise, or if it did, they didn't.
There's kind of a grey area here, feminine grey area, that so much of this stuff is a game. So much to do with boxing, for whatever, is a game. That there's always that area in which they can say, look, we'll say anything to get people to buy something, right?
Yeah.
The fights, the pretend fights they have at the press conferences, right? I actually saw someone on some vaguely serious person on Twitter recently saying, there was the usual pretend fight at the press conference, and they said, for once, I think that was real. I think it was. I said, no, it wasn't. Yeah. It's never real.
Yeah.
Right? So there is just that whole thing of just people carrying on. And pretending, basically. Right?
Yeah.
They're almost constantly pretending.
Yeah.
So if you want to describe that as pretending, right? So there is that part of their minds, I think, whereby they just say, look, at anything I say, I'm only pretending to say it.
Yes.
We live outside the law here. We're not kind of, we didn't go to Eton, or we didn't go to Harrow or whatever. Do you know what I mean? We have to pretend to do a lot of things and say a lot of things, because that's how it works.
Yeah.
So I think that's how they might justify it.
Oh no, totally. And he talks about the money, and they would say, well, Cliona, you can't apply those standards to us, but you're perfectly entitled to apply those standards. It's public discourse. They're shoving it down people's throats.
Yeah. Actually, I thought of someone just when we were talking about why don't people just stop James Blunt. James, the fellow who did You're Beautiful. You're Beautiful?
Yeah.
Didn't he do that? He more or less announced, I'm now going to live in my mansion in Ibiza. Thank you very much.
I think he's still making records.
He's still making records, but he's not doing it seriously. He puts them out, and
he's found the crack cocaine of fame difficult to give up, totally. I mean, he's still popping up on the Graham Norton show and doing his bits, but...
Yeah, but he isn't really part of the business.
Maybe not. I'm not as familiar with James Blunt as I should be. I don't know if
none of us are.
I don't know if he's brought out an album recently. Somebody can text in. The Joe Brawley kind of stuff, I think maybe that's what prompted off Paul Kimmage maybe trying to speak with Kavanagh, I suspect.
Yeah, because there's been a beef. People might know that, but there's been a big Twitter beef between Joe Brawley and giving out about MMA and Kavanagh replying saying, come down, have a look, see what we're doing in the gyms. And as I said, I think this is interesting, and because I think it's interesting about MMA, not UFC, and I think people might be really interested in just the amateur scene, which I don't know about, and is has more depth and success to it, I think, than I thought it had.
Because I get the impression Kavanagh didn't love how that went, because he talked about, as everything does on Twitter, it got aggressive very quickly, and he says then the MMA fans jumped in and compounded it with bad language, and I was like, well done guys, you've just shown Bradley exactly what he thought the sport was all about. Shock horror, Twitter didn't
cover itself in glory.
No. And
what a surprise.
We can't cover everything. I mean, it really is well worth the read. I'm sure UFC fans and McGregor fans will read it, absolutely, but I think it's worth the read anyway for anyone. And even his memories of the Mayweather fight are really fascinating. It's a really good piece. It's a pity McGregor won't sit down with anyone seriously and do something.
I mean, you would love to see. You would love to see a proper one.
The rationale and him being honest about everything. Something completely different then. The complete other end of the spectrum. If McGregor is loud and bombastic and attention grabbing, Rachel Blackmore is quietly going about her business and is doing extraordinary things. And it's on the back page of the Sunday Times.
Yeah, back page of the Sunday Times.
I would have missed this if you hadn't pointed this out to me, I must confess.
Well, Don McLean is a really good racing writer and an expert, obviously. And he's really, I love the way he writes because he gets so much in. And he just has a piece on the back page, actually, beside David Walsh's work on Rachel Blackmore. And he manages, in a very short space, in a very small space, really, to get in everything you need to know about Rachel Blackmore. So it's really well worth winning. And also the key for writing this week, of course, is not only is she actually leading the Jockeys Championship by one ride from Paul Townend at the moment, but the one thing she hasn't done, and she has done so much, is that she's the first female to turn pro, the first female conditioning rider, the first female to ride more than 40 winners in National Hunt, but she hasn't ridden a Class 1 winner, if you like, and that's the big... he's saying that's the step for her, and it's happening. She's riding a horse. I think Balcover to Flow in the John Durkin today in Punchestown, and there's a lot of people watching that to see if that happens for her. So, but I think it's a really good piece, and she's also somebody who has constantly said, "Stop talking about me as a woman or a female. I'm a jockey." End of. Yeah. So it's a very good piece.
I have bad news in that Balco de Flow finished third.
Oh, there you go. So she has to wait for that grade one.
I suspect it'll happen.
Oh yeah. Well, given the way she's riding, you'd have to think
it's quite dramatic the way the champion jockey race has gone. Like by the end of May, Dawn writes she'd ridden 8 winners. A double at Roscommon in July took her to over 20. And then she was suddenly at 26, 7 clear going into the Galway Festival. The general feeling pervaded that it was only a matter of time until she was caught by the pack. And then Listowel in September, she was 33 and still leading. And then Paul Tennant did catch her, but then she's after responding and regaining the lead.
There's a great battle for it this year. Yeah. I mean, racing people are really following it.
In some sense, though, the real question is why are there not more women involved in racing over the years? There's so many women are involved in the racing
industry,
huge numbers.
I suppose it's how long has it been? I mean, Don mentions, was it the 1980s? Is it written here?
Joanna Morgan was the first big. She was a flat jockey.
The first female.
Yeah, Maria Cullen was the first pro in the 80s.
First female to turn professional since Maria Cullen in the 80s. So she's the first to turn professional since Maria Cullen.
There seemed to be an argument, Declan, that women weren't strong enough or brave enough. And that was knocked on the head when people like Katie Walsh and...
But they had the great advantage of being like, sort of that they wouldn't have to be starving in the same way, all that kind of stuff, that you would think that whatever those arguments would be kind of gainsaid by...
But it clearly existed for a long time, so,
The world was a different place in the 80s and 90s. Why they weren't, Declan, because you're a woman.
But it's such a practical thing.
No, I know, but I mean, think of the 80s and 90s. I mean, it just would have been, that's the man's job.
She has...
Would you not think?
Not only has she ridden more riders than anybody else in Ireland this year, but she has had more rides than everybody except Andrew Lynch, and she's ridden for 76 trainers. But her connection with Gagenstown obviously is a big, huge thing as well. So it's just so well done. Don McLean's a lovely writer, I think.
I suspect it will happen more and more over the next generation. There'll be a massive upsurge soon.
Yeah, I think so.
Are you a racing fan, Declan?
Oh, hugely, yeah.
Are you?
Well, I mean, I used to be, as a kid, my father used to bring me to race meetings and all that, and I loved it, I'm out of the, I'm a kind of a sort of a part-time, observer of it now. I'm like the sort of people I used to laugh at who kind of take an interest in the big races and stuff like that, But I would still take a huge interest in it, and that's where I would have started. Obviously, just betting and stuff. You know what I mean? Like I knew all that stuff, and that's why the developments in gambling over the years, I've been, very aware of them, because I did used to have to pay 20% tax on my bets in a betting shop in Athlone, and this is a deterrent. Actually, it does actually stop you. No one does that anymore, so. But there you go. I mean, I love racing. I think that strikes me is that there's a line here. He says that she does not embrace the limelight, preferring to kick on and keep her head down. This would describe almost all jockeys, it would seem. When you see them being interviewed afterwards, there's almost something kind of unnerving about it. Like, they all seem like, the best people you could possibly imagine. They're humble. Their first instinct is to give credit to other people.
They rarely showboat.
Yeah, all this kind of stuff. They're totally salt of the earth types, and you always wonder, are there any bad people riding horses? Are they? Yes. Are they all? Now, they're obviously fiercely competitive and all that kind of stuff. So they're not, in any way sort of overly polite to each other in terms of what they're doing. They're ferociously competitive. But once they're finished, they all seem like the most decent human beings you ever. You heard them being interviewed, and they're humble. They're decent. They're good.
Yeah. I think
so. What is this? What is this thing? Where
maybe the lack of ego comes from the fact that you're traveling at 45 miles an hour or whatever, and you can land on your head on any given day at any given time, and you pick yourself up and you have to get back out there and do it. I think that's and actually the jockeys that I most admire are the ones who aren't at the top level, the ones that are going out on the less good horses. The horses are going to do really dodgy things, and they're still out there trying to make a living. I just think they're incredibly brave, and I think that I just think the physical challenge of the thing is such that you never get too far carried away with yourself, and you see that. Ruby Walsh and Davy Russell and Katie Walsh and those people, they're driven, just absolutely driven, because they're judged on that last horse, and gamblers judge them horrifically. So harshly.
Like, you search any of their names on Twitter after a bad race, and you'll know who's had a bet on them.
Yeah, mostly people who've never been on a horse.
Yeah, probably. So, Frank Murphy, is that what you have in front of you, Cliona?
Yeah. I mean, two people were smart enough to think about to clock that next week he's retiring at the Cork Convention. He will be retiring. Shane McGrath has a good piece in the Mail on Sunday, and also Dennis Walsh, I think, in the Sunday Times, isn't it, as well? Two good pieces, both of them well worth reading. I think if you're a GA person, because his name is synonymous in GA with so many things, particularly in knowing the rule book, how to get around rules, loopholes, his expertise in that area. But Shane McGrath's piece, 46 years as county secretary. Now, in any governance system now in sport, people would say, well, should anybody be in a job 46 years? But the strap headline on Shane McGrath's piece is, as Frank Murphy faced the final curtain in the county board, as secretary of the county board, he'll be remembered by some as a divisive figure, while others will argue he was driven by an unstinting loyalty to the Rebels' cause. And both pieces really, I think, talk about things that were great and things that weren't so great in his long career with Cork. And obviously he's the man who was targeted, even though he was meant to retire a few years ago, with getting Páirc Uí Chaoimh across the line and finishing it, and that in itself has been quite contentious as well.
Because the amount of money spent.
In terms of the amount of money spent and how often it'll be used, and whether the money would have been better spent, particularly when Cork haven't been as successful as they would like to be on the field of play. So I think GA people would be really interested in reading either of those two pieces.
Definitely been criticism of the lack of underage structures in Cork for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't realise about Frank Murphy he was a referee. He refereed the 1971 hurling final between Tipperary and Kilkenny.
Yeah, he took refereeing up when he was 16.
Yeah, I never knew that about him.
He obviously was a man who was fascinated by rules and that kind of thing as well. And obviously then he played such a central role in the famous strikes, the Cork hurling strikes and that, so there's the Sunday Times piece is very interesting because Dennis Walsh quotes the pieces from Donald O'Cusack's book where, the boys were on an All-Stars tour or whatever and were out with Frank, on the nights or whatever, and then that dramatic switch whereby they ended up on both sides of a pretty divisive battle down there for power.
Yeah.
At one point he was a selector for Cork and the county secretary. You know what I mean? And that actually would never happen anymore.
No,
That just wouldn't happen anymore. Yeah, just it would. You know, that's again, it's a governance thing. It would never happen anymore. So just I think really interesting from GA point of view. And obviously there's other stuff in the GA today. Mullinacha obviously is well written about because they're playing. The interesting about Mullinacha, they have no sponsor and they're playing Kilmacud, who have Bank of Ireland across the front. I haven't come across a GA team in a long time who have no sponsor. Yeah. I was interviewing one of the players last week, and he was saying that a couple of families pay for the jerseys, but none of them want their name on the jersey.
Okay.
So that probably tells you a lot about just the community spirit down there. So that, I mean, it's a great story. It is a David Goliath story.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's that piece of Danny Lynch by Dermot Crowe in Sunday Inn, the former.
I had never heard of Danny Lynch, I must confess. So, but you both very familiar with Danny Lynch.
Yeah. I'm familiar with him because when he was a PRO in the GAA, he would occasionally write letters complaining about something I had written about the GAA.
Right.
And, you know, he became this sort of figure in my life who he once said that that I was looking for the note. He didn't want to give me the notoriety that I crave.
Smart man.
He was.
Yeah.
How right he was.
He had you pegged.
Yeah, he really did. But he.
So he was basically the PRO at a time when he was literally the entire public relations office.
He was, yeah.
Just him.
Yeah, largely him, and then later on the PR office in Croke Park, Siobhan, developed. But whereas now it's a big beast with lots of staff. Well, relatively speaking, but he was the spokesperson for the GA for years. When I started covering GA, Danny Lynch, you rang him. Danny was always the one who came out, and he was a very droll, dry-witted, as he still is, I'm sure, and it was reflected in this piece. Kerryman. Staunch Kerryman.
Right.
So for GA people of a certain era, I think they'd be interested. Dermot Crowe has a big interview with him there. Declan.
Yeah, he says how people are always trying to, get on the case of the GA. That once when Lady Diana died, that morning the phones were hopping to see would we cancel a game in Croke Park. Right? I'm still bitter about the fact that a Liverpool match was cancelled that day. Liverpool-Newcastle, I think.
Stop there, Declan.
But I think it's a bit much actually ringing up Danny
searching
Lynch.
for the notoriety that you so crave so much.
But it was obviously, I love the idea of someone sitting in a newspaper office and said, let's ring up Danny Lynch and ask him is he going to cancel the match in sympathy with Lady Diana.
So when did he bear it? The late 90s, it seems, after that Meath Mayo All-Ireland final, I think.
Yeah, is it? Yeah.
So he was there for a long time.
He was there for years, and it said he was the kind of guy who had to deal with it. He talks about that famous game, that famous instant where Sean Boylan and I think it was Tommy Dowd, Meath had won the All-Ireland, and they were refused entry into Croke Park because the security men didn't know who they were and they didn't let them in for the post. There used to be a do in Croke Park the next day and they weren't allowed in. So for 20 years he was there, and he, back then, he would always have been the go-to guy for the quotes from Croke Park. Now it's very corporate in that you now have, you have a CEO, if you like, you have a president, and then you have a PR group who, issue press releases. Back in the old days, they didn't issue press releases. Basically, you rang Danny, so it is well worth a read, and it reminds me of the old days.
Because it's healthier, stronger, has a better image is the headline. So Dermot Crowe's time was when Danny Lynch, as PRO of the GA, was blamed for just about everything. His overarching kind of sense, Danny Lynch, is that he feels for a long time it was considered the Grab All Association, a dowdy, backward organisation run by grey men in grey suits. You had a falling down ramshackle stadium all over the country. You had clubs with no dressing rooms or dressing rooms with minimal facilities. You had all the issues which dragged down the GA, like the ban on the RUC.
That's what I was going to say. That rule was so contentious.
Yeah, you had the perceived bias against soccer and rugby. You had trouble in the north, which intervened at times. There wasn't even live television, except for the All-Ireland semi-finals and final. And now he says 30 years on, it's flourished. And, talks about that Dublin Meath saga was a big leg up around the time of Italia 90, which they liked. And he talked about going to see a football match, actually, at Lansdowne Road when he was invited, and he was photographed next to Krista Berg and Richard Harris. Not one person in the GA mentioned it. I don't think they knew how to handle it. So they just ignored it in the 90s.
He's troubled as well. He's deeply troubled. He says, I think the GA are going to have to take a serious look at the management backroom teams of counties. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's nearly an industry. Somebody said one time, the only person they haven't now is a gynecologist.
That's a classic Danny quote.
Yeah, number one priority says stop or keep the amateur status if he's given his thoughts now. And then the right balance between commercialisation and prudent management, and helping deal with the erosion of rural Ireland, he says. The day of the small farmer with 5 or 6 cows is gone. Entire populations migrated to the cities. That's going to be a big challenge, and it is, like, for the GA. That is a big thing. Taz a shot at Brendan Griffin as well, the Minister for Sport of State for Sport. I thought many people on the Liam Miller thing were too trigger happy and happy to have a pop at the GA. I mentioned in particular the junior Minister for Sport, Brendan Griffin, although he says, I'd expect nothing more from the senior Minister, Lord Ross.
Because he's out of it, he can say what he likes, which is good. That's why it makes it a good read, I think.
Okay,
yeah, exactly.
That's Danny Lynch in the Sunday Independent. That's kind of a quirky idea I hadn't seen here. And actually that ties in with a point you wanted to make about the Mail.
Yeah, I was just saying to you, like, if I was recommending for somebody to buy a sports paper today and somebody likes to sit down and have a read, I would pick the Mail. One of my bugbears with sports journalism in general is that it's so narrow. You know, it's almost like we cover 5 big sports. They get even more coverage all the time, and all the other little sports get squeezed out. So I really admire journalists who go off and get stories outside of those. And like one of the things, the European cross countries are on today, and there's a guy called Jakob Ingebrigtsen who's like an incredible. This 17-year-old is now turned 18 that won 2 senior titles at the European cross countries last year, or European on the track last year, beat his brother. Like, he's racing today. There isn't a feature on him in any paper. The Mail actually have some coverage of the European athletics today. Carl Denny has. But what I like particularly is Mark Gallagher, and he's a writer who does this sometimes. He goes off and he gets the quirky stories or the different stories. He has 2 features which really caught my eye and I think are worth reading. One of them is on a guy called Dennis Hogan, who's from Kilcullen, and he's living in Australia, and he is next up for a shot at the WBO light middleweight title. And it's just really interesting article. He's sort of patronised by a millionaire, and he goes down and he trains in his gym, which, you know, is the House of Dreams, he calls it. And it's a really good feature on this guy. He's had 29 professional fights, and I generally, I'm not a boxing expert, but I actually hadn't heard about him before. And then on the previous page, he has a feature, a really interesting feature on a guy called William O'Connor, a Limerick darts player, who is going this week. He's going to be one of 4 people at the Professional Darts Corporation, the World Championships. And I was just looking up something else on it. Like, there's 96 darts players from all over the world at that. So there's 4 Irish at it. Again, don't know anything about it. And it's just a really interesting guy, a really interesting piece about this guy. He's a carpenter. He works full time for a company in Limerick, and how he got good at darts. Why he actually beat Gerwin, the guy who won, you know, the big one that was on at Christmas time.
Van Gerwen.
He beat Van Gerwen He beat Van Gerwen in September in the Dutch Championship in front of his hometown crowd. So, like, it's a really good, interesting read.
You wouldn't hear from them often,
never hear about these sports and never hear about these Irish people out there trying to make a way through them. And sometimes I think it's great. And I think with Sunday papers, sometimes you have, you know, the writers they're not on a daily beat, so they have time to do more, you know, unusual stuff or outside stuff. And Mark Gallagher's a guy who does that a lot, and I really like that. I think he's a very good writer.
Yeah. He often crops up here in the Sunday.
There's just a thing I think I forgot to mention as well. I had a bit of recognition here from Eamon Sweeney on about the draw for Ireland playing in the European Championship.
Excellent draw that it is.
Yeah, he says the traditional Irish response to major football championship qualifying draws is to observe that the opposition are no great shakes. This conveniently ignores the fact that most of the time we're not even good shakes, right? And from my own part, when I heard of the draw, the Denmark and Switzerland, right, I hadn't, heard any reaction to it. I literally just heard it completely independently of anyone. My first thought was, we're gone, right? That is terrible. Because clearly Switzerland are better than us. Shaq. The great Shaq is the kind of player that Irish teams don't like.
Shaq is a great shake.
You often hear that. The great Shaq. You often hear people that there's a kind of player that Irish teams don't like, which is like very good or skillful.
Technical.
Technical players. So that's Switzerland, right? Who were last seen in the last 16 of the World Cup.
They're 8th in the world.
Yeah,
it's the highest ranked European team in world football.
Denmark, 2 of the most excruciating days in the history of Irish sport were had.
I saw someone muster an argument that if you take away that horrible second half, we haven't done too badly against them recently. There's all 0-0s and 1-0s. We've done fine.
From the time they beat us back, in the end of the own hand era, one of the most gruesome days for Irish sport, and up to now. So that we can turn around after this draw and say, That's great. That's excellent draw.
I think it's because we were in with Germany and the Netherlands for about 20 seconds.
Yeah.
I think that was part of the optimism. Yeah, it was like anything's better than that. But in short, we're goosed.
Well, then the fallback is that, we qualify anyway, don't we? Because
we should get a playoff courtesy of the Nations League, as everyone seems to.
Yeah, everyone seems to have assumed that without necessarily going into the fine print of it. But hopefully that we'll get through on a technicality of some kind.
Well, I mean, we can only hope. Dermot Gleeson just has a wonderfully random and quirky story, the kind of thing only he probably knows about, that way.
Yeah.
So Frank Beard, you won't have heard of Frank Beard. Sinatra never forgot the first, last and only winner of his golf tournament. So it's kind of 1963. The Frank Sinatra Open Invitational was held once and once only on the PGA Tour. This, the 103rd anniversary of Sinatra's birth. So it was meant to climax with a black tie banquet at the Palm Springs Riviera Hotel. And the tournament was not won by Arnold Palmer nor Jack Nicklaus, but by a 24-year-old Monday qualifier by the name of Frank Beard. Beard remembers being amazed at the tournament where we got free food along with cashmere cardigans for free. Can you imagine? And they all got given these crafted McGregor heel-shafted putters with a caricature of old Blue Eyes on them. And there's only a dozen of them around, 2 dozen of them around. So if you have one, it's worth about $20,000. And so he played the tournament, and Sinatra was a big golf fan, and somehow he managed to win. He finished birdie par to beat Jerry Steelsmith. It was my first professional event ever. It was huge. He says the star power was blinding. They were all there. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, the Rat Pack. And then it turned out that he didn't actually have an invitation to the banquet, even as winner. So he found himself celebrating his first tour win with a cheeseburger from hotel room service. And then 7 months later, he falls into a coma, seriously ill. His mother is distraught, and then the home phone rings. It was Sinatra. I wanted to see how Francis is doing. And he doesn't know how they got the number or how Sinatra heard he was sick, because he hadn't really spent much time with him. But the lovely kind of postscript is he was a big Sinatra fan, went to see him loads of times over the following years in concert. Said, I still don't know how he pulled it off after my win. I never had any kind of contact with him, but every time I'd go to his show, he would point me out in the crowd. And Sinatra, apparently famous for not taking requests, but he would say to the audience, my man Francis Beard is in the audience tonight. He won my golf tournament a few years back. Francis, take a bow and pick a song.
That's lovely. The last line is how a kid from Louisville ended up winning the first, last and only Frank Sinatra Open Invitational Tournament. I'll never know, but I relish the memory. And he's written it. I mean, again, it's so eclectic. It's typical of Dermot Gleeson, because next Wednesday is the 103rd anniversary of his birth. I mean, that's just so. It's like, I love the American writer Rick Riley. It's like a little piece of Rick Riley as well, isn't it?
It's good. And anything with a bit of Sinatra thrown in.
Yeah, and he has Bob Rosberg, a golfer, who's describing how Sinatra, he liked to be good at everything, but he couldn't play golf as well as Dean Martin, Bob Hope or Bing Crosby.
Yeah.
That bothered him, I think.
Bad golf doesn't discriminate, Declan. It'll take down the greats,
It's a great leveler, isn't it?
Massive leveler. Is there anything else anyone wants to touch on before we go?
Just for people again to see it, probably there is a lot of follow-up discussion or opinion or analysis on the Brian O'Driscoll drugs story, and which I think is interesting because it has struck a chord and it's raised in a lot of papers.
Shane McGrath's piece.
Shane McGrath is very good on it. David Walsh even speaks about it. There's a couple of more pieces on it, and it's that whole question about what's healthy and what's healthy for people to be doing as professional athletes. So I just think, particularly as it was raised in these offices, and it's a really interesting discussion.
Right on the seat where Declan Lynch was sitting, believe it or not, it was raised.
Yeah, and now I'm going to raise an even bigger issue: is why the great question is why doesn't Mo Salah smile when he scores a goal now?
And what's your answer to that? He didn't score. He didn't smile yesterday. No,
he scored 3 times, three no smiles. I think he's a deeply religious man. Man of great faith. Mm-hmm. I think, perhaps I'm only guessing now, there may be something in his belief system about not appearing vainglorious or triumphant.
He gave away his player of the match award yesterday.
Gave it to James
Milner,
but that's just a guess. Or perhaps after the brutality of Sergio Ramos in the Champions League final, maybe a new hardness or coldness has entered his once sunny soul. I'm not sure, but he's wonderful this year as well, as just in a different way.
Yeah.
He's playing really well. He's scoring loads of goals, and yet this idea has got around that
what's wrong with Mo?
Yeah, he found out.
As a matter of interest, as we go, because I'm going to be killed here. I must say, I wasn't, when Brian was in here talking about it, and I wasn't massively surprised. Like, of course, I mean, okay, the habit thing, and it was quite bad, and diaphragm is tough, but the notion that rugby is bad for your body and there's a price to be paid and you're reliant on this stuff.
Well, I think what caught my ear was, that a doctor walks down the middle of a bus and asks people what they want. And also,
great, yeah.
like doctors are, doctors are the people that we care with our health long term. So where's their loyalty? And also, like, it's not a surprise at all to me. And I'm sure we're talking about racing. I'm sure there are jump jockeys out there. There's people in lots of sports where there's contact
Apologies
or
to interrupt,
injuries.
yeah. Keith Andrews and Stephen Reid were on here during the week the next day. And Stephen Reid was saying, his life was anti-inflammatories.
Yeah, of course, we know this. What I think it has started debate about is what is healthy for people to be doing. And it really puts me back to those, all of those great footballers in Britain in the 50s and 60s who, were given cortisone injections to play and their knees were all shot. And we discovered so many of them in later life had trouble,
Basically crippled, yeah.
Crippled with knee injuries. And so, it certainly underlined for me the lie that athletes are healthy. They're not healthy. They're incredibly fit, incredibly skilled, but very often they're very unhealthy because of what they're putting their bodies through.
And Shane McGrath actually does raise a really good point, which is that it is difficult now for us to totally swallow the sense that, O'Driscoll is retired 4 or 5 years at this stage. And
it's only a short time.
Yeah, so,
4 years.
as this transformational thing happened very quietly in the space of 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And that is now a big question for rugby to answer. And he talks about, he opens his piece with an IRFU statement saying, look, it's all fine, we follow the best protocol. But O'Driscoll wasn't playing in the 90s. This is 4 years ago. So are they telling us this massive transformation has happened in the space of 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, as I said, none of us are innocent enough to think that athletes don't take painkillers.
It's legal.
And everything.
It's technically legal.
It's legal if it's not. But there are ethical questions I think to be asked of how far do you push an athlete in your care? How far do you push their body? How far are they willing to push their bodies?
That is the problem. That they will push their bodies.
We know they will, and that's
all the way.
And that's why doctors are cared with things like concussion. We know in rugby, players always want to go back. They want to go back in every sport. But somebody has to take care of them as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, it would be very interesting to see how rugby deals with this now, because you suspect it's going to rumble on.
Yeah, the old medicalisation, isn't it?
Yes, that's the phrase.
Yeah, and that's the phrase.
And Paul Kimmage first raised.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, thank you both very much for coming in. Much appreciated. Declan Lynch from the Sunday Independent. The very best of luck in the Sports Book of the Year.
Thanks, Joe.
Give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, Cliona. What do we... No, don't, of course. Cliona Foley from Off the Bench and journalist, of course. Thank you very much for coming in. Munster, by the way, in the last 30 seconds are 30-0 up against Cass. They've scored 3 tries, though. I'm not sure if they have possession with 30 seconds left to try and go the length of the field and score a bonus try. But either way, the 4 points are in the bag. We'll talk to James Downey about that in a second.
Off the Ball on News Talk. Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.